So I want you to try and imagine the therapeutic space as, well, like a classical physics laboratory.
Yeah, in physics lab.
Yeah, exactly. Just think about what that actually feels like. It's fundamentally contained.
Absolutely. It's totally predictable.
Right. It's bounded by 4 physical walls. There's a heavy door that closes and locks out the world, a clock ticking quietly on the desk, maybe a box of tissues, and, 2 chairs angled toward one another.
Yeah, the classic setup.
Exactly. And in that physical room, every variable is somewhat within your control. I mean, you observe the patient observes you, and the laws of cause and effect behave exactly as you expect them to.
Yes, it's a very controlled environment.
But now, imagine that laboratory suddenly shifting into the realm of quantum mechanics. Like the physical walls just dissolve into lines of code.
Oh, wow. That's a brilliant way to put it.
Right. The space is no longer a physical room with geographic coordinates. It travels as packets of data through fiber optic networks.
Yeah, across wireless screens and, well, into entirely simulated digital worlds.
Exactly. The fundamental rules of observation, of human presence, and of connection have basically completely shifted. I mean, you are no longer sharing the same air, you are sharing a bandwidth.
And that shift, it forces a really profound re-examination of the core philosophy of psychiatry itself.
Which is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Right. Because if we strip psychiatry down to its absolute essence, it is the study of how the brain, the mind, and experience interact with one another.
And how that process can go wrong.
Exactly. How that delicate triadic process can go wrong, leading to suffering or pathology. I mean, the brain provides the biological hardware, the mind is the psychological software, and the experience is the environment shaping them both.
So when the environment completely changes, everything else has to adapt.
Spot on. When the environment in which that human experience happens becomes, completely digitized, the interactions irrevocably change. The biological brain adapts to new stimuli, the mind processes social information differently, and, well, the experience of both the clinician and the patient is radically transformed.
We are no longer just treating a mind and a body. We're treating a mind mediated by a machine.
Yes, beautifully said.
Okay, so let's really unpack this. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. For those of you listening, whether you are a psychiatry trainee, a registrar preparing for exams, or even just a clinician trying to make sense of your evolving practice, this is your conceptual synthesis.
Right. We are essentially mapping out the digital container we are all now working within.
Exactly. Today, we are exploring Kaplan and Sadok's comprehensive textbook of psychiatry, specifically Chapter 7.9, which covers electronic media in psychiatry.
And for you listening, it is really crucial to approach this not as a mere inventory of tech tools.
Right. It's not a software manual.
No, not at all. We are here to build robust mental models to actually strengthen your clinical reasoning. We want to examine how the dual forces of technology and the COVID-19 pandemic have rapidly altered how mental health care is delivered.
And how individuals actually experience their own psychological well-being. I mean, we're going to explore the mechanisms, the manifestations, and the clinical meanings behind this whole digital revolution.
Because when the medium of care changes so drastically, the way you think, observe, and intervene just has to adapt just as quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Here is where it gets really interesting, though. Let's define the digital container we are now working within. I mean, what were the specific forces that actually built this?
Well, we are looking at the collision of two dominant and, in many ways, opposing forces. The first is an invisible force of relentless exponential expansion.
You mean the growth of microprocessors, right?
Yes, exactly. Governed by Moore's law. This is the observation that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years.
Well, the cost halves, I think.
Spot on. The cost of that computing power halves. And for over half a century, this law has held remarkably true. It meant that computing power didn't just grow, it compounded.
It just exploded in 1,000 different directions.
Right. It offered us this overwhelming, limitless horizon of diverse choices, platforms, and digital environments.
So it's like a force of absolute, unrestricted possibility. You could build any tool, connect with anyone.
Exactly. But the second force, that was a sudden, extreme force of restriction, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, right. The ultimate bottleneck.
Yeah, and this creates a profound structural irony that we really have to understand. For decades, technology offered us a massive menu of choices for how we might optionally communicate.
But then the pandemic basically restricted our physical choices to absolute zero.
Precisely. It forced a sudden, universal reliance on these specific digital technologies. It acted as a massive societal funnel.
Mhm.
Overnight, you simply could not see your patients in that classical contained physics laboratory of your office.
You had to use the network, or you just couldn't practice at all. I mean, telemedicine went from being this sort of interesting niche option for rural patients to being the absolute only mechanism for providing care.
And the scale of this is just hard to overstate. When you look at the data, telehealth claim lines rose by an astounding 2,817%.
Wait, really? 2,800%?
Yes, from December 2019 to December 2020. I mean, that
Yeah.
isn't just a change in preference. That is a forced, instantaneous paradigm shift for the entire medical profession.
That is just staggering. And with a shift like that comes the urgent need to decode the new lexicon we find ourselves using, right?
Absolutely. We tend to throw these digital terms around interchangeably in clinical meetings, but they actually describe very specific mechanisms of interaction.
Like, take the prefix tele.
Right, tele. It derives from Greek, meaning at a distance. It denotes the transmission of information over a geographical gap. It began with a telegraph, transmitting discrete text.
And then it evolved to the telephone, right? Adding sound.
Yes, adding the intimacy of analog sound.
Yeah.
Then television, introducing moving images. So when we practice telepsychiatry, we are fundamentally practicing the art of medicine mediated through television technology.
And then the prefix video just specifies the visual component, like images capturing the visual manifestation of the patient.
Exactly. And from there, the lexicon expands into environments that try to trick the brain's spatial awareness. You have virtual reality, where you completely occlude the physical world.
Right, surrounding a person's visual and auditory fields with a simulated environment using goggles.
Yeah. The brain's threat detection systems actually react as if the environment is real. Then you have holographic projections, which do the reverse. They intrude three-dimensional digital images into the actual physical environment of the room.
It's quite sci-fi when you say it like that. But alongside all this, we also have the broader concept of e-therapy. And there's the crucial distinction between synchronous and asynchronous connections, isn't there?
That distinction is absolutely vital for clinical reasoning. When we say an interaction is online or synchronous, it implies a live connection providing immediate availability for a response.
Like sitting in the room together.
Right, the feedback loop is instantaneous. But asynchronous communication is fundamentally different. It involves deliberate, structurally enforced delays between a message being sent and a response being received.
Like email or secure messaging portals.
Yes, and text-based e-therapy.
Which is fascinating, actually, because when you really think about the mechanism, asynchronous therapy via email isn't a new psychological concept at all, is it?
No, not really.
It's essentially the ancient art of letter writing. I mean, people have used letters for centuries to process their most intimate relationships. When you look back at published correspondences between, say, early psychoanalysts, they often reveal that the writers felt their letters were actually more honest and revealing than their physical face-to-face meetings.
That's a brilliant point. Email is just telegraphic letter writing.
Right. And the delay itself, the hours spent waiting for a reply, that might actually be part of the therapeutic process.
It absolutely is an active ingredient. The medium shapes the disclosure. Think about the cognitive process of writing an asynchronous message. The patient has to structure their distress into words.
They have time to edit, right, to reflect.
Exactly. They engage their prefrontal cortex before hitting send rather than simply reacting from the amygdala in real time. Furthermore, the physical accents of the therapist removes the immediate fear of judgment.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it leads to disinhibition.
Yes, a very well-documented phenomenon. Patients will often disclose trauma, deep shame, or even suicidal ideation in an asynchronous message much earlier in the relationship than they ever would while making direct eye contact in a physical room.
It allows for a vulnerability that is sort of buffered by distance. But as we move all of this highly sensitive clinical interaction into the digital realm, we really have to understand the legislative and structural container holding it.
Oh, absolutely. You simply cannot practice modern psychiatry without a deep understanding of the legal scaffolding.
We are talking about high pay, right? The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in the U.S. and similar frameworks elsewhere, plus the HITECH Act of 2009.
Right. This represents the structural shift from the locked steel filing cabinet in the back of your clinic to the networked, cloud-based server. And, well, the vulnerability profile of those two things is entirely different.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
iPay is the foundational law here. It formally defines what constitutes protected health information, or PHI. This is any health information that can be explicitly linked to a specific identifiable individual.
And the whole philosophy there is to guarantee that this PHI remains under the control of the patient, right? Even as it moves between providers.
Exactly. But to do that, HIPAA has to strictly define exactly who is legally allowed to handle this data.
Right, so it creates categories, like covered entities, which would be the health insurance plans, the clearinghouses, and of course the healthcare providers themselves.
Yes, if you are billing electronically, you are a covered entity. But the modern digital ecosystem requires constant outsourcing. So IPAPA also defines business associates.
Ah, right, the third-party entities, like cloud storage providers or IT consultants.
Yes, billing administrators, medical transcription services, they are engaged by the covered entity to carry out specific functions involving PHI, and the law requires a rigid, legally binding written contract.
A business associate agreement, right?
Exactly. It legally forces the third party to comply with the exact same privacy and security standards as the hospital itself.
And that whole framework was massively accelerated by the HITECH Act of 2009. When you look back at it, HITECH was basically a massive government economic stimulus package.
Right, over $25 billion.
$25 billion, designed to forcefully push the entire medical industry into adopting electronic health records, or EHRs. Because before 2009, the adoption rate was just abysmal.
It really was. Only about 10% of hospitals were actually using comprehensive electronic records. The rest were still entirely reliant on paper charts.
So the government stepped in with this massive lever to force the evolution. But they didn't just hand out money, did they?
No, they created a highly specific bureaucratic concept called meaningful use. To get the financial incentives, a clinic couldn't just install the software. They had to mathematically prove they were using it meaningfully.
Which meant hitting quotas for electronic prescriptions and sharing data. And it wasn't just a carrot, it was a stick. If you failed to meet the stages of meaningful use, you faced direct financial penalties.
Yes, progressively reduced reimbursements. They called this entire legislative push administrative simplification.
Administrative simplification.
Yeah.
That is incredibly ironic because from a clinical reasoning perspective, we have to ask, has the EHR actually simplified administration for the clinician?
Well, the structural reality suggests the exact opposite. It hasn't simplified administration at all. It has shifted the burden directly onto the physician while simultaneously introducing profound new vulnerabilities.
Right, because when data moves from paper to a network, any loss of protection is a data breach. And the textbook highlights a staggering statistic here.
Yes, between October 2009 and October 2021, 78 million healthcare records were breached.
78 million individual lives. That is just a breathtaking amount of sensitive data. Psychiatric evaluations, addiction histories.
It's the most private details of human existence, suddenly exposed, and it fundamentally changes the risk profile of every clinic. A physical cabinet can only be breached by someone physically breaking in. A network EHR can be breached by an algorithm operating from another continent.
And the criminals evolved, right? They realized stealing data to sell was inefficient, so they weaponized the network itself with ransomware.
Exactly. They hack into a hospital, deploy encryption software to lock the medical staff out, and paralyze the facility until a massive ransom is paid.
Halting surgeries, diverting ambulances, it's literally taking the hospital hostage. And the financial scale is terrifying. Ransomware payments reached over $400 million globally in just the first quarter of 2020.
And in 2020 alone, at least 560 healthcare facilities were directly impacted by ransomware attacks. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the shift to electronic media changes everything.
The therapeutic container isn't bounded by soundproofed walls anymore. It's bounded by your IT department's cybersecurity protocols.
Exactly. Which leads us to wonder, how does this technology actually alter the mechanisms of our minds and the clinical data we rely on?
Right. To understand that, we need to introduce the concept of the prosthetic brain.
Yes. We live in an environment saturated with microprocessors. And because they are always with us, we've begun to use them as auxiliary cognitive devices. The smartphone in your pocket is functioning as an extracorporeal processing unit.
You've offloaded massive amounts of cognitive load onto a piece of silicon. Memory, navigation, schedule.
I love that term, the prosthetic brain, because the mechanism of memory retrieval from a network is vastly different from biological memory.
Exactly. If I try to remember a moment from childhood, my biological brain has to actively reconstruct that memory. It's subject to degradation, mood-congruent memory bias.
But if you pull up a photograph on a smartphone, the retrieval is instantaneous and pixel perfect. But crucially, it's detached from internal biological context. It lacks emotional resonance.
And this continuous reliance on an external memory bank leads to cyborg theory, which isn't science fiction, right? It's observational reality.
Absolutely. It explores the blurring of the boundary between the biological human and the artificial machine. When someone spends 10 hours a day interacting with a screen, they're synchronizing internal biological circuits with external silicon circuitry.
The device is no longer just a tool we pick up and put down. It's an immersive ecosystem.
Yes, it alters how we process sensory information. But this biological integration comes with a massive paradox in the clinical setting. The paradox of data reduction versus data bloat.
Oh, this is fascinating. Let's look at data reduction first, specifically with telepsychiatry. When you conduct a session over video, there is an inherent, unavoidable mechanism of data loss.
Right. Any electronic data transmission inherently involves not capturing other data. In a physical room, you are a biological sensor processing thousands of variables unconsciously.
Microexpressions, shifting body weight, the subtle scent of alcohol. Telepsychiatry heavily crops the reality.
It literally puts a two-dimensional box around the patient. There is a brilliant case study in the text that demonstrates this mechanism of failure.
Oh, the consulting psychiatrist story. Tell them about that.
Yes, a highly experienced consultant is asked to perform an evaluation via video link. During the interview, he feels it's going exceptionally well. The patient appears to be smiling, maintaining eye contact, nodding.
So based on that visual data, he confidently suggests reducing her diazepam dosage, assuming she is stable.
Exactly. But the consultant is completely blind to what the local clinical crew, standing off camera in the room, are seeing. The patient is actually becoming increasingly resentful and agitated.
Right, her shoulders are rigidly squared off, fists clenched. She is radiating controlled hostility.
But because the camera is framed tight on her face, and patients know how to selectively present a cooperative face, the digital data the consultant receives is entirely misleading.
It's a profound example of dangerous data reduction. He was completely walled off from her autonomic nervous system arousal.
His first clue that his assessment was wrong came at the very end, when she suddenly dropped the smile, glared into the lens, and angrily demanded, "Yeah, what do I do the next time I'm feeling suicidal and don't want to call anyone?"
The tight frame completely missed the escalating pathology. It's a nightmare for clinical reasoning. You have to actively ask about what is happening outside the frame.
And then we face the exact opposite problem on our own screens. Data bloat in the EHR.
Going from missing physical cues to drowning in irrelevant data. They call it death by 1,000 clicks, don't they?
Yes. The original promise was a trackable, highly legible record. But the reality is these systems were designed primarily as billing and compliance engines.
Not clinical narrative tools. The clinician is forced to navigate fragmented interfaces, clicking through endless drop-down menus just to document a basic interaction.
It creates massive cognitive overload.
I think the text says it's like trying to fly a commercial aeroplane while simultaneously updating the software code using a manual typewriter. There's this observation that the modern EHR is electronic in the exact same way your grandfather's radio is electronic.
That's very accurate. It's bulky, inefficient, constantly buzzing with irrelevant alerts, and it drains attention away from the biological patient in the room.
And it creates a severe ethical dilemma. To survive the burden, clinicians use auto-populating templates.
Yes, templates that force the physician to digitally attest to comprehensive examinations that were only cursorily performed just to satisfy billing codes.
It actively incentivizes fraudulent documentation. The system encourages inappropriate use of copy and paste, dragging forward old notes.
Erroneous information is mindlessly carried forward. The actual clinical truth is obscured by cloned data. It risks severe medical negligence by burying the signal in the noise.
So we have the prosthetic brain-altering memory, video-reducing data, and EHR's bloating data. But we also have to examine the algorithms, right? The underlying architecture of engagement.
Because this is where the mechanisms of social media directly intervene in the psychological lives of our patients.
The psychology of app design is entirely focused on one metric: app engagement.
Right. The goal isn't to inform or connect, it's to keep eyeballs locked on the platform to generate ad revenue. They deploy highly sophisticated artificial intelligence to generate engagement-based ranking.
And the mechanism is a continuous feedback loop.
Yeah.
The AI monitors every micro-interaction and feeds the user more of what captures their attention.
It exploits the brain's dopamine reward prediction error, delivering variable schedules of reinforcement much like a slot machine.
And looking at this impartially, the critical realization is that this AI does not care about objective truth. It doesn't care about mental health.
No, it only cares about retention. And the AI learns that falsehoods, outrage, and fear spread vastly faster than nuanced truth. Salacious content keeps people scrolling.
This directly drives the spread of deep political polarization, pushing users toward extreme left-wing and extreme right-wing ideological echo chambers impartially.
It facilitates mass disinformation campaigns. It has even been documented as a highly effective tool for radicalization by extremist groups like ISIS. The algorithm identifies vulnerable users and systematically leads them down a rabbit hole.
It's an automated form of psychological manipulation, and psychiatrists really need to understand this, because when a patient presents with sudden, severe anxiety or rigidly held ideological beliefs,
The pathogen might not be a neurochemical imbalance. The pathogen might literally be the algorithm in their pocket.
which brings us to the clinical manifestations. How does this present as pathology in the clinical setting?
We must first look at the phenomenon of pathologic internet use. Now, internet addiction is not a formal diagnosis in the DSM-5.
Right, but the ICD-11 has included gaming disorder, hasn't it?
Yes, characterized by impaired control over gaming and prioritizing it over other interests despite negative consequences. But from a clinical reasoning standpoint, we have to ask, why do people overuse these environments?
What deficit are they compensating for? The data indicates roughly 30% of self-described internet addicts use it specifically to escape negative feelings.
It functions exactly like a digital analgesic. It numbs the pain of reality, and it's structurally perfect for this because it's cheap, requires no physical effort, and is available 24 hours a day.
And a profound element of that escapism involves identity shifting.
Right.
Platforms like Second Life or VR Chat.
Yes, where users spend hundreds of hours building alternate identities. Millions of people create avatars, form deep emotional relationships, and build societal structures entirely on server farms.
And this presents a truly mind-bending challenge. Imagine a patient who spends 15 hours a day as a powerful avatar, but presents in your clinic as timid and depressed.
Which identity are you actually assessing? They may present problems consistent with their online persona rather than their biological self.
You might be inadvertently treating the avatar while the biological human remains unaddressed. It's a modern ego splitting.
Exactly. And beyond alternate realities, we are seeing direct social media-induced manifestations causing immense damage. The mental health toll on the developing brain is profound.
Massive spikes in anxiety, depression, and self-harm. And cyberbullying is a huge factor here.
Over half of all adolescents report experiencing bullying online, and more than 1 in 3 have faced explicit cyber threats.
And it follows the victim into their bedroom. There's no safe haven. And over half of them don't report it to parents or teachers. They carry this trauma silently through their devices.
And these digital exposures can bypass the psychological and become shockingly physical. Look at the rise of TikTok tics.
Oh, right. The sociogenic illness example.
Yes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, pediatric neurologists noted a sudden surge in teenage girls presenting with explosive Tourette-like tics.
Historically, mass psychogenic illnesses required physical proximity. But this was happening globally, simultaneously, among isolated girls.
The mechanism was digital social contagion. These teenagers have been watching massive amounts of TikTok videos featuring severe Tourette syndrome tics.
The AI flooded their feeds with similar videos, and their mirror neuron system unconsciously mirrored the repetitive behavior. A real physical symptom manifested from a purely digital exposure.
The algorithm literally reprogrammed their motor pathways.
Okay, so that's the dark side. But technology is a dual-use tool. Let's look at the flip side. How is the digital world actually healing us?
Virtual reality therapy, or VRT, is rapidly becoming a highly powerful clinical tool. It functions primarily via systematic desensitization and extinction learning.
Like treating a fear of flying or social phobia. You place them in a highly controlled simulated environment.
Exactly. You trigger the fear response in a safe setting, introducing stimuli incrementally. They build emotional regulation without the logistical impossibilities of real-world exposure.
And the text suggests VRT might tap into neurophysiologic information processing, similar to EMDR, right?
Yeah.
The intense multisensory engagement might accelerate the brain's ability to process traumatic memories.
Yes. And we also have to acknowledge the massive efficacy data for standard telepsychiatry. The Cambridge Review analyzed hundreds of papers and found robust themes.
Patient satisfaction is consistently remarkably high. People appreciate the convenience.
And crucially, the diagnostic reliability is proven to be equivalent to face-to-face consultations for common presentations, like mood disorders, psychotic disorders, and substance misuse.
And it's incredibly cost-effective. It reduces did not attends and massively expands access for rural or incarcerated populations. It's often the difference between world-class care and no care at all.
What is fascinating is that while it is highly effective, it introduces entirely new contraindications and ethical hurdles. Your clinical capability is suddenly dependent on internet bandwidth.
If the frame rate drops or the audio desynchronizes, the fidelity of your clinical observation is compromised. You have to completely rewire your clinical reasoning.
Which brings us to integration. How do you maintain professional ethics in the digital age? First, you have to navigate the wild west of health apps and online information.
Patients don't arrive as blank slates anymore. They arrive having extensively consulted Dr. Google, a complex mix of peer-reviewed data, disinformation, and algorithmic bias.
You must integrate this by forming a collaborative partnership. You have to gently and scientifically correct those influenced by anti-vaccine movements or overblown fears of medication side effects. You are constantly contextualizing data.
And what about mental health apps? The text mentions there are between 10,000 and 20,000 available right now.
Yes, 20,000 apps claiming to improve well-being. But the vast majority lack any supporting empirical data. They focus on engagement rather than actual clinical outcomes.
We have to exercise extreme caution. There are instances where poorly designed suicide prevention apps actually increased suicidal ideation because they focused attention on distress without providing human intervention.
An app is a medical intervention, and without rigorous data, it carries the potential to cause harm.
That perfectly transitions into the broader ethics of the digital clinic. As a modern psychiatrist, you are essentially a data steward.
The ethical dilemmas are profound. Take involuntary detention, for example. Sectioning a patient under the Mental Health Act via telepsychiatry is fraught with severe risk.
Taking away someone's liberty based on a two-dimensional, potentially lagging video feed feels deeply precarious. You might miss the smell of alcohol or a hidden weapon.
Which is why professional consensus strongly urges avoiding remote assessments for involuntary detention whenever physically possible. The medium simply does not transmit enough reliable data.
And then there's the philosophical concept of confidentiality itself. There is a debate where one side argues that privacy is over. Hackers can breach almost any system given enough time.
So how do you maintain trust? By fundamentally redefining informed consent, you must transparently explain how data is stored, transmitted, and the inherent security limitations.
Consent must explicitly include warnings about potential hacking. You have to be brutally honest before the patient opens up.
And finally, we absolutely cannot ignore the biological cost. We have to talk about the oxytocin deficit.
Right, because despite the convenience, up to 64% of surveyed patients still state a strong preference for in-person visits. Why is that?
Because we are biological creatures evolved for physical proximity. Neurobiological studies show significantly more oxytocin is released during physical, in-person meetings compared to video calls.
Oxytocin promotes social bonding and trust, right?
Right.
When we meet through a screen, both patient and clinician suffer a chronic oxytocin deficit.
We miss pheromones, shared physical space, the unconscious synchronization of breathing rates. We miss the profound communication of simply sitting in silence together.
And the clinical risk is substantial. A patient might become highly adept at e-therapy, but fail to generalize those coping skills to the biologically rich physical world. The prosthetic brain works perfectly while the biological organism remains isolated.
Absolutely. So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's distill this vast landscape down to what you absolutely need to remember for your practice.
Right, the key takeaways. What are the top 5 maintaining strict clinical impartiality?
Number 1, electronic media has irrevocably transformed psychiatric assessment, treatment, and communication. It acts simultaneously as a clinical intervention and as an active determinant of psychological experience.
Number 2, telepsychiatry significantly expands access and maintains strong diagnostic reliability. But it demands acute awareness of data reduction, the critical nonverbal cues lost outside the camera frame.
Number 3, electronic health records support data collection but introduce massive systemic burdens, including data bloat, billing fraud risks, and profound vulnerabilities to privacy breaches and ransomware attacks.
Number 4, social media algorithms shape human psychological well-being. They are engineered for engagement, contributing to cyberbullying, ideological polarization, and novel sociogenic illnesses.
And number 5, technology can brilliantly enhance psychiatric care, but it can never fully replace the oxytocin-driven, neurobiologically grounded human therapeutic relationship built in a shared physical space.
Excellent summary. Now, to really lock these concepts in, let's run through a few clinical vignettes, SBA style. I'll lay out the scenario, give you a moment to formulate your clinical reasoning, and then we'll break down the answer.
Let's start with question 1, focusing on legislative concepts. Under the structural regulations of HIPAA, which specific type of clinical documentation receives unique, blanket privacy protection that separates it from the general medical information in an electronic health record?
Give that one a think for a moment.
Right. Well, the answer is psychotherapy notes. Because they are the clinician's personal impressions, they are legally walled off from the general EHR and require specific, separate patient authorization to be released.
Question 2, focusing on digital mechanisms. A young patient using a popular social media app reports finding themselves increasingly anxious, comparing themselves to extreme standards, yet feels entirely unable to stop scrolling for hours. According to the architecture of the platform, this compulsive behavior is largely driven by artificial intelligence-generating algorithms focused purely on maximizing what specific metric.
Take a second to process that mechanism.
The answer is engagement-based ranking. The AI is optimizing for time on screen by exploiting dopamine reward prediction errors, regardless of the psychological cost to the user.
Moving to question 3, focusing on clinical manifestations. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns, pediatric neurologists globally noted a sudden, unprecedented surge in teenage girls presenting with unusual complex motor and vocal tics. What digital phenomenon was identified as the primary mechanism for this presentation?
Just hold that thought in your mind.
The answer is a mass sociogenic illness, triggered by the algorithmic amplification of TikTok videos featuring individuals reporting Tourette syndrome, leading to unconscious mirroring via the brain's mirror neuron system.
Question 4, testing your clinical reasoning in the moment. You are conducting a complex psychiatric evaluation via telepsychiatry. The patient appears to be smiling pleasantly and verbally cooperative on your monitor, but then abruptly and angrily ask what to do if they feel acutely suicidal. What inherent structural limitation of telepsychiatry does this interaction perfectly highlight?
Consider the constraints of the medium here.
The answer is data reduction. The tight camera framing blinded you to crucial off-camera physical cues, such as clenched fists or rigid squared-off shoulders that would have clearly indicated escalating autonomic arousal and controlled hostility.
And finally, question 5, focusing on the integration of digital treatments. Virtual reality therapy is becoming heavily utilized for treating severe specific phobias, like fear of heights or flying. Its primary mechanism of therapeutic action is most closely patterned after which traditional established behavioral therapy technique.
Take a final moment for this one.
The answer is systematic desensitization, allowing for safe, graduated exposure and extinction learning within a highly controlled, simulated environment.
If any of those vignettes tripped you up, or if the mechanisms feel abstract, I highly encourage you to review the underlying concepts in the chapter.
Absolutely. Rereading the text always helps cement these models.
We will leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you head into your next clinic. We've talked extensively about how we are increasingly outsourcing our semantic memories, our emotional coping skills, and our deepest social connections to our external devices, what we term the prosthetic brain. If that boundary between the biological human and the silicon machine is truly permanently blurring, then as psychiatrists moving into the future, are you still just treating an isolated biological mind? Or are you now fundamentally forced to treat the entire entangled human-machine ecosystem as a single integrated organism?
There really is the defining question for the next era of our profession, challenging us to redefine the very boundaries of the self. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Here are the details of this episode.
Electronic media in psychiatry. Byline. The therapeutic space is no longer confined to a room. Psychiatry now travels through networks, screens, and digital worlds.